So a little bit about Chorus. We are a not-for-profit community effort dedicated to making open research work. Our goals are to help our main stakeholders of publishers, institutions, and funders enhance the value of their open research. We work to spotlight research objects like data sets, software, user facilities, etc. We work with our stakeholders to improve the overall quality of their metadata related to open research, and we host forums and workshops, like today's forum, to connect the stakeholders so they can learn and hopefully build trust and integrity together. So now over to our moderator, Scott Delman from ACM, to kick us off.
Thank you, Howard. And thank you, everyone, for registering and for joining today's session. Today's session will focus on the issue of trust in scholarly publication, which is more than ever before under attack. Most publishers have experienced a dramatic or even exponential increase in allegations of intentional fraud, plagiarism, undeclared conflicts of interest, and other forms of misconduct. While in recent years, the advent and rise of LLMs have introduced what some might consider unintentional misconduct by authors and reviewers whose intent is not to deceive, but rather to use technology to take shortcuts to increase productivity and success rates with article submissions. But whether the form of misconduct is organized crime by paper mill cartels or individual authors using AI to gain an advantage, the impact is the same, which is an erosion of trust in science, which impedes real discoveries, stifles innovation, and ultimately undermines the entire research enterprise. There are many reasons for this, including financial profit motivations by bad actors, such as paper mills, or an increasingly competitive landscape for research funding, tenure and promotion, or other financial or non-financial incentives. As publishers, societies, research funders, research institutions such as universities, and scholars, there's an urgent need to push back against these threats to the integrity of the scholarly enterprise with education, policy, and policy enforcement, and technology to identify misconduct as early in the research and publication life cycle as possible, but after publication if necessary. Today's speakers represent three different stakeholders with a vested interest in identifying misconduct, holding bad actors to account, and ensuring the integrity of the scholarly record. They are Jigisha Patel, Joris von Rossum, and David Sholl. I'm going to just briefly read their bios, and then I'm going to introduce each of them to begin their talks. Jigisha is a research integrity consultant who works with organizations committed to research integrity to manage complex research integrity issues such as paper mills and develop preventative strategies to reduce the risk of research and publication misconduct. She provides training for researchers, editors, and research integrity teams on all matters related to peer review and research integrity. She is currently an elected member of the COPE Council, the Committee on Publication Ethics, and works with organizations to help them adhere to COPE guidelines. In full disclosure, I should also indicate that Jigisha and my organization, ACM, do work together on investigations of misconduct. David Sholl is the Executive Vice President for Research at Rice University, where he is also Professor of Chemical and Biomedical Engineering and Professor of Chemistry. Prior to joining Rice in 2026, he was Executive Director and Vice Provost of the University of Tennessee Oak Ridge Innovation Institute and Director of the Transformational Decarbonization Initiative at the Oak Ridge National Lab. From 22 to 23, he was Senior Strategic Policy Advisor for the Department of Energy's Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, and from 2013 through 2021, David was the school chair of chemical and biomolecular engineering at Georgia Tech. He's published over 400 articles and several books and is the editor-in-chief of the AICHE Journal. In 2024, he was elected to the National Academy of Engineering. And lastly, Joris von Rossum. Joris is the program director of STM Solutions. He leads various programs and projects within STM Solutions with a special focus on the STM Integrity Hub and AI. Before joining STM, Joris worked for several leading companies and organizations across the science, technology, and medical publishing space, including Digital Science and Elsevier, where he initiated and led a variety of important innovations and cross-publisher initiatives within the research and publishing ecosystem. Joris holds a master's degree in biology and a PhD in philosophy. Each speaker is going to give a roughly 10-minute presentation, and after all three speakers have spoken, we'll have approximately 20 minutes left for questions and answers, which you can post in the chat, and then we'll do our best to have each of those questions responded to. So without further ado, let me pass it over to Jigisha Patel for her talk.
Thank you. Thank you. The first thing is thank you, Scott and Chorus, for inviting me to take part in this event. My talk is going to give an overview from my perspective of what the main threats and opportunities are in the publishing field. So if you just go on to the next slide, please. So Scott has already described what I currently do. I am an independent research integrity specialist, and I have a co-advisor role now at the Committee on Publication Ethics. But my background is in medicine. I trained as a medical doctor and worked for the NHS here in the UK for a number of years and did some research while I was doing that. And then in 2007, I became a medical editor at Biomed Central. And at that time, there was research integrity as a concept in its own right didn't even exist. But it was since then, research integrity has gradually gained momentum as an entity and a specialism in its own right. And it was during those years that I gained quite a lot of experience of handling research integrity issues. And it's from that perspective that I am giving this talk. Next slide, please. So the biggest threats that I see are related to manipulation of the publication process, which you might know as paper mills, and now the widespread use of generative AI tools. So in case you're not aware of what manipulation of the publication process is, this is where an entity, it could be an individual, it could be a group of researchers in an institution, it could be a non-academic organization or somebody who's actually running a commercial organization. And the aim of all of these is to hijack the quality control mechanisms that journals have to ensure that they publish quality content. And the aim is to ensure that a manuscript gets published. And when that happens, then authorship to that manuscript is sold, or payment is received for adding citations, and the perpetrators of this process charge fees for various aspects of this process. The very first paper mill I saw was in 2014, and at that time, the mechanism for hijacking the publication process was by posing as an editing agency, and on the front of it, offering authors editing services to say, we'll improve the look of your manuscript, we'll improve the language. But then via the back door, they were also offering guaranteed publication to authors for a higher fee. And they were achieving this by fabricating emails. At that time, it was possible for authors to input emails of potential peer reviewers. So what the editing agency was doing was fabricating emails, impersonating real scientists, but using fake emails, and thereby hijacking the peer review process. We've learned that paper mills are very, very adaptive. As soon as one mechanism is detected, they move on and try something different to hijack the publication process. So since then, I've seen exploitation of special issues whereby editors are bribed or even are employed by paper mills to allow papers through in exchange for payment. Sometimes conference proceedings are also affected, and paper mills are constantly changing and adapting according to according to what of their activities have been detected. And then this has been made a lot worse by the widespread use of generative AI tools as well. And I'll explain a bit more about that later. It's affecting all fields. So originally, my first experience was in medical journals, but we know it happens across all of STEM and also social sciences as well. And it affects all types of publications. So journal articles, books, conference proceedings, and even article type. So now with the use of AI tools, it's a person with no expertise at all can generate a review article using a tool and present that and it's very difficult. We're being inundated with clearly AI-generated review articles, which are very difficult to manage. Obviously, this is all undermining trust in the published record. And a lot of focus has been put on how do we deal with this? How do we deal with the published record and maintain its integrity and correct it? But also what's happening because of these phenomena is that innocent authors who are conducting their research properly are also coming under risk. And I'll explain more about that if you move on to the next slide. So I must apologize, this is quite a busy slide, so I'll guide you through it. This diagram shows the cast of characters behind paper mills and retractions. And when a paper mill is discovered by a publisher, the affected articles are retracted. The problem for the authors here is that the authors of these retracted articles are not all the bad guys. And that's what this diagram is intended to demonstrate. So if you just focus on the pink area at the top, a proportion of retractions for paper mill activity will involve innocent authors who were inadvertently caught up in the paper mill activity. And this might happen because a paper mill has decided to run a special issue, and it's being managed by a corrupt editor, but authors have submitted to this special issue believing it to be genuine and in good faith, and that their work has been published, but then because it was part of a corrupt special issue has been retracted, and the authors haven't done anything wrong, but now they have a retraction to their name. And then if you look at the bottom section of that pink area, the other group of researchers who are the junior researchers who are buying authorship. And you may say, well, these are the bad guys, you know, they deserve to have a retraction to their name. And you can argue that's true, but it is possible that these junior researchers are under a lot of pressure to publish, but also are in an environment where their peers are taking part in paper mill activity. And for them to not do so as well puts them at a disadvantage, affects their chances of career progression and promotion. And so in some ways they may not want to take part, but they feel they have no choice but to take part. And then in the middle, I've put the real villains of the phenomena, which are the senior academics who know they're taking part in paper mills and have published and therefore have been detected because they were part of they were authors on affected articles. But if you just look to the left, the real bad guys are conveniently out of reach, because if they don't publish, if they're not authors on articles, it's very difficult to detect who they are, and it's very difficult for them to suffer any consequences. I won't talk about the other side because that's not really relevant. So the point of this slide is to just illustrate how innocent authors and junior authors who may be inexperienced and maybe not being as bad as we think they are, get caught up and end up with retractions to their name. And then one of the concepts about retractions is that not really intended to punish authors. Retractions are intended to correct the literature. And some retraction notices even say, you know, this notice is just to correct the literature. We are not blaming the authors for anything. We haven't investigated the authors. So some of the retraction wording actually says that. But nevertheless, once an author has a retraction to their name, that then may crop up in the future, especially if tools are being used to identify authors who have been involved in paper mill activity. These innocent authors will also get caught up in that and be flagged in the future. So this is clearly not satisfactory and a problem for innocent authors. Next slide, please. And then there's a challenge of AI tool use. So if you look on the left here again, the pink area, before 2023, you could read an article and be pretty confident about detecting AI fabricated content. It was quite easy. You'd read an article and it would be incomprehensible. It would lose the plot. It would be repetitive. There'd be tell signs like tortured phrases and sentence mashups. It would be simple and naive. There'd be no actual methods described or data presented, overly technical, incongruous declarations and questionable citations. And you read that and you thought, yeah, I know this is fabricated, and that was quite straightforward. This is because paper mills were using AI to generate manuscripts, but AI tools were not being used more more generally. And then on the right-hand side, there were features of clearly genuine work, because that work would be coherent and logical and have all the details necessary to understand what happened, and the tables and diagrams would reflect the results, and the declarations would make sense, and it would all look good. So that distinction wasn't as difficult to make. Since 2023, when AI tools were launched for everyone, and now they are widely used, and in fact, they are used for legitimate purposes as well. So it's not wrong that AI tools are used as part of doing research and writing up research. So anyone now can be using these perfectly innocently and legitimately. But because of that, it is now even more difficult to tell the difference between the two. So you can read a manuscript and you can see possibly the introduction was AI generated, but this may not be, this may have been done legitimately. Odd language, previously you might put it down to a person, the authors, where English is not the first language. You may have thought, well, that's why the language is odd. But now you don't know whether it's odd because of that or whether they've used AI tools. And also sloppy reporting, similarly, you don't know whether it's because the authors are inexperienced or whether this is a fabricated manuscript. So the whole process of making this distinction has become much more difficult. And again, because of this, innocent authors may be wrongly accused. And next slide, please. And then the third big issue is around predatory publishing as well, which is another risk. This diagram shows the relationship between legitimate publishing, predatory publishing, and paper mills. So in the top left-hand corner is a legitimate publisher which has stated standards and quality control measures. And then the grey area is the murky world where there are predatory practices happening, where practices deviate from best editorial and research integrity standards. And that's where the predatory journals and publishers come in, because they are journals or publishers where there are no quality control measures. They exploit the AI model, guarantee publication for various fees, but crucially, they imitate legitimate journals to mislead authors. And then paper mills, a slightly different phenomenon in that they are targeting legitimate journals and they're bypassing poor quality control measures. But they probably both overlap to some extent, in that paper mills may be creating predatory journals or working with existing predatory publishers and journals to sell publications of fabricated manuscripts. But again, here you can see how an innocent author gets caught up in all of this. And I've come across cases where innocent authors have published in a predatory journal, not realizing that that's what they've done, because the predatory journal looks like a legitimate journal. And there's nothing they can do, because the predatory journal itself is not going to retract the work to allow them to publish it elsewhere. So they've done a lot of work. And unfortunately, now their work is in a journal which isn't indexed, and they can't, claim the credit that they deserve for it. So there are lots of ways that innocent authors now are becoming involved in these practices, which weren't there when I first joined publishing. So it's become a very sort of important recent phenomenon. Next slide. So while this is, this seems like a dire situation, now is the time, hopefully, that people are now willing to come together and collaborate, to recognize that this is a huge threat and a huge risk, and that we should really be getting together to try and prevent these issues happening, rather than trying to fix the problems after they've occurred. Now, collaboration has already been happening between editors across journals, and editors and publishers, and between publishers. And they've worked together to formulate best practice and best practice and policies, and to share knowledge about detecting and preventing publishing misconduct. And I'll talk a bit more about that when I talk about COPE. But I think now there's the momentum, there should be the motivation to increase collaboration between publishing and academic communities and other communities as well, to raise awareness of the threats to research integrity, because I think a lot of publishers are aware of all of the threats that I've described, but I'm not convinced that there is much awareness beyond the publishing community.
Jigisha, just an FYI that we're at time now, so I don't know if you have more slides or.
Sure. Okay, so I will just quickly talk about COPE. So if you want to jump to the next slide. So the Committee on Publication Ethics is an organization, a charitable organization, which brings together editors and publishers to develop policies and processes and guidance to help deal with research integrity issues. And I do recommend you look at the website, because there are lots of useful resources there. But one of the things COPE is doing is trying to increase collaboration with institutions and universities to do what I've just described in the previous slide, which is to work out processes, practices in a collaborative way, so that institutions are involved in developing guidance for their researchers in the same way that COPE has done that for editors and publishers. And then the final slide. Sorry, next slide, please. And then similarly, in terms of what's happened in terms of collaboration, so in 2023, this United to Act movement began, where this wasn't just publishers, journals, and institutions, but many stakeholders got together with one purpose: to try and tackle the phenomenon of paper mills. And again, if you look at the website, you can see more about what has happened there. But one of the things I would recommend you do is look at the educational material there, which describes the threats that paper mills pose to all stakeholders. And those resources are available for you to download and use to spread the word and raise awareness yourself within your own organizations. And then final slide. So that's it. Thank you very much for giving me the platform to talk and listening to my perceptions.
Thank you, Jigisha. That was great. We'll come back to Q&A at the end. And now over to Joris and Rossum.
Yep. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. My name is Joris Rossum. I am the Program and Product Director of STM Solutions. STM Solutions, next slide, please, is the operational arm of STM. STM is the Global Association of Scientific, Technical and Medical Publishers. Represents over 160 members in more than 20 countries. So as mentioned, STM Solutions is the operational arm of STM. So my presentation will focus on technological solutions. Next slide, please. So let me start by giving some reasons why trust in science is being challenged. First of all, the research community has become much larger and much more globalized, and that is, of course, a very good thing. More scientists means more ideas and hopefully more progress in science. But it also has a downside, and that is that whereas in the past scientists would know each other, meet each other at conferences, know each other's institutions, that is being challenged. So science became more impersonal, and the trust that we used to have is no longer self-evident. Second reason, next slide, please, is the pressure to publish, and the previous speaker spoke about that. It can lead to people cutting corners or even engage in misconduct. That can be just scientists who want to advance their careers, or maybe people in certain professions that require a publication, as we have, for example, in certain countries where doctors need to publish every year to progress their careers. And last, and that's also what the previous speaker talked about, new technologies that make it increasingly easy to fabricate research data and papers. And especially, of course, GenAI is a huge challenge. And I will talk a bit more about that in a later slide. Next slide, please. So how have publishers responded? This is coming from a report that we published in January of this year, listing some of the things that publishers have done as a response to these developments. Most important, publishers have built dedicated integrity teams that screen incoming manuscripts, integrity teams that look at the peer review process, but also teams, of course, that are involved with the painful process of retractions, of course, something we all want to prevent from happening. So many publishers have developed quite large integrity teams. Publishers have also built or integrated advanced screening technologies in their publication process. So the whole idea there is to ensure that we capture these bad manuscripts as early as possible, so that we can reject them as soon as possible. Publishers have built these tools themselves, but of course there's also a very active ecosystem now of startups and small companies that build these tools. You may have heard, of course, we know the plagiarism software, but we also have Clear Skies that has built a tool that shows papers that look like paper mill material. Cactus Communications has quite a big group of signals that are offered to publishers. So it's a very active community and it's very useful to publishers. And last but not least, publishers have initiated cross-industry infrastructures. We talked about COPE, United to Act. One other example is a project I lead myself, the STM Integrity Hub. The focus of that initiative is to build a shared infrastructure for screening manuscripts. We started 4 years ago. We have now a system screening an application that brings together over 20 tools connected to the submission systems of publishers. And we now integrate about 20 tools in those applications. And currently over 40 publishers are using the Integrity Hub, and we screen about 200,000 manuscripts per month currently, which is good. But, and the next slide, this is probably not going to be enough. And the main reason here is GenAI. It just makes it extremely easy to fabricate all types of digital objects. And they are very, very difficult, if not impossible, to detect. And whereas the detection currently in the submission process and later in the process is going to be very important, we still think it is insufficient for the future, especially because GenAI challenges the current methods of screening manuscripts. Next slide, please. And that means that we need to move what we call beyond the manuscript. Looking at a manuscript alone, a manuscript with images, it's just impossible to establish the veracity and the authenticity of the material. So we need to move beyond. And what does that mean? Well, we want to move from a paradigm where publishers are checking whether something is wrong to focus on solutions that demonstrate the validity of submitted research. That sounds a bit abstract, but I'll give you an example how that could work. And most important, very important to stress here is that requires collaboration. The previous speaker talked about collaboration. This really requires collaboration across the research ecosystem. The challenge is not so much technical, but it's social technical. All stakeholders have to participate in this new way of establishing the authenticity and veracity of scholarly research. Next slide, please. The interesting and what I mentioned already, technologies to address this already exist. About 18 months ago, we asked More Brains, a consultancy firm, to prepare a report on the feasibility of technical solutions for detecting falsified images and in research. Next slide, please. This looks quite complex, but this actually describes a workflow through which we could achieve this. So let me try to run through this fairly quickly. So when an image, for example, an image taken with a microscope is captured, and we are at the top left of the slide here, a unique digital fingerprint of the image, and that's what we call a hash, is generated by the instrument software. So this is a unique fingerprint. It's a hash that is uniquely representing the accept image data. This hash is then digitally signed, it is stored, or it's embedded in the image and submitted alongside the manuscript at submission. So when an editor receives the image, they independently compute a new hash from the image data using the same hash function. So this allows the publisher to see if the image is actually original, because by comparing the newly computed hash using the same hash function, the same algorithm, with the hash from the signature from the original image, the editor can in this way determine whether the image has remained unchanged since its creation and confirm that it originates from the trusted instrument. So they are sure that this image is real. It was actually created by an instrument at a certain institution. This is something that technology allows the editors to establish. So this is one way in which researchers can prove the authenticity of images and other research objects. And again, I'm talking about images in this particular example, but it can be extended to all digital objects. And although this workflow may seem complex, the same underlying technology, the same underlying cryptographic principles operate automatically in the background when we visit a secure website. It's more or less the same workflow. Next slide, please. Currently, we are preparing a pilot to test this method in a simplified way. And this workflow that I show here represents a minimal technical solution for certifying and validating images, which can later then further be developed as the project progresses. And it aims really to demonstrate the willingness of institutions, publishers, journals, researchers, and learned societies to collaborate, because again, all these stakeholders need to collaborate. Again, the challenge is not so much technical, because the technology is really available. It is social technical. We have to implement this in our current ecosystem. We are still looking for additional partners and funders for this initiative. So in case you are interested or know an organization that may be, please contact me. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Joris. That was great. And last but not least, we're going to hear from David Sholl to give us the research institutions perspective. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Scott. I'll try and keep us on time. I realize I have a lot in my slides, so I'll go through some quite quickly. If we can go to the next slide, please. My perspective as both as a researcher and a research administrator, this slide is just to illustrate that one of my research interests actually has been looking at reproducibility and replicability of data in the chemical literature. And so that's, something that informs understanding the chemical literature. It doesn't address the issue of bad actors that our first speaker mentioned. Next slide, please. So first, let me give you my perspective as the Chief Research Officer at Rice University. You can see here that Rice University has annual R&D expenditures of about $250 million. That's actually relatively small by US standards. There are many large universities here that have annual R&D expenditures over $1 billion. Those are places with medical schools. We actually did a study some time ago, some of our students here who collected all the papers published by Rice faculty. And you can see that in the last 20 years or so, Rice faculty on average have published 10 papers a day in the literature. And so that one of the points I'd like to make is that it's really quite infeasible for us at a university level to have any kind of screening or oversight of those papers before they go out. I will mention that previous to my job at Rice, I was at one of the DOE national labs, and in that institution, there was a required internal review before every paper submission. This wouldn't culturally be possible at a university, but I'll also say at the national lab, that it's mainly compliance focused. So it's making sure that there aren't research security issues with manuscripts and sponsors aren't going to be surprised by papers and so on. So it tended to be a very minimal kind of process. Next slide, please. So now I'll switch to another side of what I do, which is I'm the editor-in-chief of the AICHE journal. Just to give you a little bit of perspective from a journal editor in this discussion that we're having. So the AICHE journal is the flagship journal for the American Institute of Chemical Engineers. We like to think of ourselves as one of the handful of top-tier peer-reviewed journals in the field of chemical engineering. It's a relatively large journal. We handle over 1,000 submissions a year, so several new submissions every day. And it's a generalist journal, and that means that we handle all fields of chemical engineering, from things that are entirely computational to things that are very image heavy, to go to the previous speaker's point. The structure that we have of the journal is that there is an editor-in-chief, that's me. I am the person that sees every single submission. So I first make a decision on whether we move ahead with the manuscript. Those that we move ahead for peer review are handled by 9 associate editors. Those associate editors are also professional academic chemical engineers. So these are people who are prominent in our field. And I'll just make the point at the bottom that in our field, 80% of our submissions are from China. That simply reflects where research activity is in the world. So that's neither a good nor a bad thing, but it's just a reality that most of our submissions are coming from a culture that's different from at least my culture of handling these things. Next slide, please. Several years ago, typical as many journals, the requirement we had of our authors was that the authors included a statement like the one at the top saying, well, if you ask us, we'll give you the data. And it probably will not surprise people on this call that that's actually highly ineffective. There's been an example I've shown you on the slide here in psychological research where it turns out that this statement is essentially meaningless, that even for very recent papers, it's incredibly rare for authors to actually share their data. Next slide, please. We did a sort of a pilot study several years ago where we just chose one of our issues and we asked, could we get the numerical data from a paper's figures in an easy way? Not by asking the authors, but actually by looking at the published data. And not surprisingly, the answer was essentially no, that in almost no cases could we get the data. And so that's led us to make some changes in our journal. Next slide, please, that have started to address this in a moderate way. And I will say that this is a fairly small step compared to some of the things that the previous speaker mentioned, but it's intended to provide some moderate barriers to entry to submitting a manuscript and to make the information that the authors provide more transparent to reviewers and to future readers. And so essentially we now require authors to include all of the numerical data for their figures. And so many figures in the journal have graphs of various kinds. Clearly that data comes from a spreadsheet. So we essentially just ask the authors to share that spreadsheet. And then we also have them include a short section in the manuscript about what that data is and also some information. We reject papers that don't do this. And so many papers are initially rejected and then are sent back to us. It's taken some time, but we now have got to the point where this is a fairly minimal disruption for the journal. I think on the next slide, if we can go to that, I've got just a couple of examples of what these data sections look like. They're not very, very long and complicated, but they do have specific information about what data is available. And our objective here really is to motivate good practices in the authors that are publishing with us, and typically knowing that people can look at your data is a powerful way just for people to think through and make sure that their data is high quality and presented well and so on. I think the next slide is one more example, and it shows sorry, it's okay. This is my final slide. We're just one journal of many, many journals. We're published by Wiley. Wiley publishes thousands of journals. Yes, if we could go to the next slide now, please, that would be great. I think there's places that various people in the scientific research ecosystem can work on these things. We heard great examples from the previous two speakers. Certainly for people who are a journal editor or maybe on an advisory board of a journal, then I think it would be important for each journal to think about what's right in your discipline. And I'd, of course, be happy to talk to editors of specific journals there. One, I think, quite interesting thing to do is for reviewers of manuscripts to actually proactively ask for data sharing. So here's an example I just copied from the Center for Open Science. And the key thing with this statement is the last sentence, which is, I include this in every review. And so it's having your own personal standards of what you expect. Again, it would be different from discipline to discipline, but requiring that of any author's paper that you review. And then, of course, one thing I always advocate as a researcher is that we need to be thinking about this with our students, with our postdocs, really bringing these issues to front of mind and make sure that we're talking about them. All of what I've talked about here is about making manuscripts for the good actors, the active researchers, better, more reproducible, and higher quality. And I'll echo the concerns of the first two speakers, that there are also bad actors in the publishing community. And so we have to have sort of different mechanisms within our publishing ecosystems to handle those things. So I will stop there to make sure that we have some time for discussion. I appreciate the invitation to join the group today.
Thank you so much for that, David. That was great having that perspective. So I don't see any questions in the chat yet. So encourage everyone, if you have questions, to put them in there. But maybe I'll kick it off with a question or two. Let me first ask David. So you focused obviously on the good actors and what we can do to ensure the integrity of the papers, and of course focusing on reproducibility, and the data itself is a key thing. Within my own organization, we also have a badging initiative where the data gets reviewed, but it's been optional. And there's always been a reluctance across all of our publications to make that a mandatory requirement for a variety of reasons. Many of our authors are at companies as opposed to in academia, and there might be restrictions on sharing that data. So what has your institution done? I want to focus a little bit on the bad actors. What has either your journal or your institution at Rice done to address the issue of paper mills and other types of bad actors?
Yeah, Scott, it's a good question. I think, in some sense, I personally am the key bulwark against that for my journal because I see all of the manuscripts. And so I just try and remain aware of the issues that Jigisha and others have raised so that I can hopefully detect those things. We tend to be all of our editors are, really working people in the field. And so we feel like we know the relevant people in the field. We have very, very detailed peer review. That's a little bit of a woolly answer though. So, I don't think that I have paper mill activity in my journal. I certainly haven't detected any, but it's always a concern. And I'll just flag one concern, that if I reject a paper because of whatever reason, there's not a way for me to transmit information about that to the rest of the publishing community. And so my assumption is that the authors simply turn around and submit that to another journal somewhere. There are so many journals these days. And so as an editor, all I can do is to maintain the quality of my own journal.
Okay. I'm going to go through these next two questions, actually go back to David, but then we'll try to have questions for Jigisha and yours as
Can
well.
I maybe just respond very quickly to David?
Sure.
Because we are going to introduce a tool in the Integrity Hub whereby if an editor rejects a paper on the basis of a paper mill suspicion, then we keep a anonymized version of that manuscript. And if that manuscript then appears at another journal, that editor gets informed that please take care because it was rejected on the basis of this suspicion. So that's something we're at the moment building and hopefully rolling it out in the next few weeks.
Yeah, that would be extremely helpful for editors like myself, Joris. Thank you.
Let me also give Jigisha an opportunity to respond to that same kind of question. I mean, from your perspective, what can institutions do?
I think it's all about education and awareness raising. I was talking about how innocent authors inadvertently get caught up in all of this activity. because they just don't know that they're in it before it's too late. And so I think institutions, first of all, need to collaborate with publishers and journal editors who are aware of and are experienced in paper activity, and so they understand the issue. And then institutions could institute things like ways of whistleblowing, because many paper mills are run within institutions by legitimate researchers who do this on the side. And if a researcher was to find out that there's a paper mill running in their institution, there could be a process in place for them to alert the right people that this is happening, because at the moment there's no process for them to even address this. So there are things like this that institutions can do: collaborate with publishers, set up processes, allow researchers to raise concerns if they think that there's paper mill activity occurring in their institutions. There needs to be more talking between the two fields, as it were.
Yeah, no, I would totally echo that from the perspective of a society publisher. We think, I mean, education is very clearly an enormous challenge, and without singling out any particular country, we do see there are huge cultural differences in terms of what is acceptable to do, where many publishers will say, well, that's plagiarism. There are authors in countries that say, is that wrong? Should I not be allowed to do that? So for my organization, it's a combination of policy, making sure the policies are kept up to date, especially in connection with AI and new technologies that are making it easier and easier to sort of cut corners. And making sure that you're educating your authorship. I think as a publisher, we have a huge challenge because we're publishing 50,000, 75,000 authors a year. How do you sort of set a bar so that every author that submits a paper understands what's acceptable behavior and what's not acceptable behavior? So I think it's a combination of the two. Let me pose a question from Justin Pickard to David. How do we address researchers who are short on time, who can't reasonably accept a review and review large amounts of data? It can be difficult to find reviewers. There's also a rise in reviewers submitting AI-generated reviews. So that's the other side. We've really talked about authorship, but we're also seeing that in the peer review process. So how would you respond to that challenge?
Yeah, Justin, I mean, those are excellent points. We definitely see that, for my journal. We considered asking reviewers to specifically comment, let's say, on the supporting information, which is where we want this data to be, but opted not to do that in the end. So our approach is having this section in the manuscript that describes it, and hopefully that prompts reviewers to look at it. But this is driven by the issue that you've raised, that it's very difficult for us to find high quality reviewers, and we're not going to help ourselves if we burden them with very difficult procedures. So there's a real balance here.
Jigisha, Joris, I don't know if you want to address that point at all.
Maybe I can add one.
So go ahead, Joris.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I think AI is an opportunity here in the sense from the perspective of the reviewers, is that it can take a lot of the work, the more tedious task involved in peer review away, like, for example, data checking or integrity checking. And the reviewer can really focus on the things that are, that should be done by a human being, and it's also the more interesting aspects of the peer review. So I think we should think, how can we use AI to make the work of the reviewer easier, lighter, and more interesting.
Jigisha?
I agree with all of that. I would just add, I mean, another idea that's been around for years is training for peer reviewers or accreditation for peer reviewers. So, how can you trust that a peer reviewer has used their own expertise and not an AI tool, or maybe it's somebody who has actually received some sort of formal training and a stamp of approval to say, yes, this person can peer review properly. It does add to the burden, but going back to the whole idea of there being a lot of fabricated research, I think there might even be a demand for this, because So surely researchers want to be able to peer review and have their work peer reviewed properly by their fellow scientists. So there may well be demand for this.
Yeah, within my own organization, we very recently rolled out a peer review training course, effectively a certification. It is not a requirement, and that's the other challenge, is that we try not to mandate taking these courses and getting certified, but it is a badge that you get that tells a particular journal or conference, this person has actually gone through the course. They know what the standards are. They have a basic understanding of what's acceptable behavior and not acceptable. And we're seeing a lot of people taking those courses. So I'd encourage certainly other societies and publishers to create those kinds of programs. I don't know if there are third parties that offer those kinds of things. They have to be tailored to the particular publisher, because every publisher is going to have different policies. But I think that's a really good idea. Let's see. I see a question from Marie McVeigh. Do you find challenges in AI-based plagiarism? That is very little text duplication, but fully copied or paraphrased logic and figures and tables. Let me ask Jigisha, since I know she does this as a consultant for my organization and other organizations. What's your experience with AI based plagiarism?
Yes, I mean, I touched on this in my talk as well, about how it's so easy now to generate a manuscript using an AI tool, which is going to use stuff that's already out there and put it all together for you. And it's very hard. I mean, the challenge is, do I find challenges? Yes, and they're getting worse and worse. It's very much more difficult now to tell the difference between somebody who's genuinely done the work and someone who hasn't. And again, it's the language. How do you tell the difference between AI generated language and human language? I think that's getting harder and harder as well.
Yeah, there are some tools that are out there, like Guillaume Cabinac's sort of tortured phrase tool that help as an indicator. But I think the challenge, and I'll speak as a mid-sized society, it's overwhelming. And I feel oftentimes that we're playing whack-a-mole, where the technology is advancing so rapidly, making it easier and easier to do misconduct. The technology to identify that misconduct is advancing rapidly, but perhaps not as rapidly as the bad actors. And so how do you, as an organization, whether you're a publisher or a university, how do you keep up with the volume of misconduct that's happening? We've all seen mass retractions from the large publishers, where they're retracting thousands and thousands of articles. But what if you're a smaller publisher? How do you deal with that? And knowing that it's easier to use these tools now, and you always have to have a human being in the loop, because these tools just are red flags or yellow flags. You then have to have human beings investigating those cases and following some sort of manual process for what to do. Let me see if there are any other questions. I do not see any other questions. We're about 5 minutes out from the end of this. Let me give each of our three speakers an opportunity to kind of on the fly raise any issues that they think would be valuable to those participating in the forum. Let me start with Joris, and then I'll go to Jigisha, and then we'll finish with David.
Yeah, let me maybe comment on the last remark. It's an arms race between AI being used to detect material that is fabricated by AI with bad purposes. We're not going to win that arms race. When ChatGPT was launched 3.5 years ago, the week after, you saw announcements, we have the tools to detect. It will not work. Our prediction was that it will not work, and it did not work. And the difficulty is, of course, that most publishers now allow for the use of GenAI to improve the language. So even if you detect something that is generated by GenAI, still it may be permitted by the publisher. So that's not something And again, to go back to my theme, we have to go beyond the manuscript. Just looking at the manuscript will not be sufficient. We have to look at other trust markers, like, for example, what I showed, but also looking at identity is another important one. Now, researchers can still submit a manuscript with a Yahoo email address. Maybe we should make the institutional email address more mandatory so that at least we know the people who are submitting are actually the people they claim to be.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would ask, is it the use of AI that's the problem? Is LLM use a trust marker? Or is it the fact that the author that's using the LLM to generate a manuscript or parts of a manuscript, they're not checking their work, they're not checking the references, and of course you have hallucinations and other problems. So is it a technical problem or is it a human problem?
I think it's a technical problem. It's simply very, very, very difficult to see if something is generated by GenAI. That is a technical problem, yes.
Over to Jigisha. Final thoughts.
I do think we need to sort of change our perspective slightly, because, I mean, we've talked about how difficult it is to mandate policies about data sharing and other open science practices, and publishers are reluctant to do this because they're worried that their authors will not want to do it and go elsewhere. But if I was an author, knowing what I know, I would be wanting to maintain a paper trail of my work and keeping, a dated timestamp records of everything I've done. I'd be wanting to publish in a journal that supports open science practices. I'd be demanding that journals facilitate this for me, because I don't want to be accused of any of the things I talked about. And so perhaps it is a matter of actually the researchers who are doing the hard work and wanting to protect their reputations and their credibility, they perhaps should be telling publishers, hey, can you make this easier for us to do? And we should switch our thinking around to that way, because as Joris said, we're not going to win the arm race. We're not going to solve the problem from the other side, as it were.
Thank you. And the final word to David.
Well, I'm going to tag on to what Jigisha said. I think these things actually reiterate the key value of very high quality journals and of disciplinary journals where, people in the field understand how the processes work. Because for all the reasons that Jigisha just said, I think that our top researchers, they want their research to be recognized, but that the name brand value of journals that they publish in is a key part of that. And then it's incumbent on publishers and editors like myself to, really take that reputation management seriously.
Yeah, no question. And once you've lost trust, it's really hard to get it back.
That's right, Scott.
Yeah. Well, that concludes our session.